It's an integrated communications agency. This is the fourth in a series of webinars which the growth company is hosting to help keep businesses informed on the latest advice and guidance in relation to the current COVID-19 pandemic. There's no doubt that the uncertainty around the situation is very worrying for businesses up and down the country. However, as an organisation, the growth company is doing all it can to support organisations, issue advice and guidance, and share the latest developments as and when they happen. Each webinar will focus on a different theme and will feature experts from a wide range of organisations. I hope you'll find today's discussion useful. Thank you very much for joining us for this fourth webinar, examining the biggest public health issue for a generation. At this present moment in time, there is no shortage of news and information about the virus. From the numbers infected, countries impacted, through to panic buying and travel restrictions, we've got round-the-clock coverage. But what is getting less attention in the media is the business impact of coronavirus and, crucially, the role businesses can play in the battle to delay the spread of the virus and reduce the impact it's got on our country, our communities, and our economy. The Growth Company's webinars are looking at this global pandemic from the perspective of businesses. The subject of today's webinar is the legal and insurance implications of COVID-19 on organisations. Looking ahead to Monday's webinar, we'll be discussing what businesses in the hospitality, leisure and tourism sectors can do to protect staff and customers while managing day-to-day operations. But back to today. I'm truly grateful to be joined by two people who have generously given up their time to be with us. Across from me, I've got Steve Kuncevich, a lawyer and a partner at BLM, and to my left, I've got Alison Loveday, a partner at Kennedy's. Before we go into detailed conversation, I just want to say, as a business owner, there's a lot of empathy around this table for everybody who's tuning in. This is a week completely unprecedented. We're all in it together, and there's a huge, massive virtual professional hug from us all. Today, you've got two lawyers who actually speak fluent human, and for the next 45 minutes, please get your questions in, either on YouTube, or tweet them in to the @GrowthCoUK, or use the hashtag C19GC. We'll try and answer as many questions as we can. Just before we start answering the questions though, Alison, just tell me from your point of view, how's it been for you this week?
It's been crazy. I guess the same as it has been for everybody else, I think, right across the country, personally and professionally. I can't think of a time when I've woken up thinking what will have happened overnight, because there's just so much going on, and even in the space of a day. So I've got three children, older now, but I've got, a daughter who's just come back from university, very disappointed. Her first year's not quite panned out as she thought. A son about to do his A-levels, who's trying to work out whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, that he now doesn't have to do the exams. Yeah. And a younger son who's cock-a-hoot because he thinks he's going to be lying around playing FIFA for the next however many months. Within Kennedy's, there's been a lot of change. We were already looking at how we could work more agilely, paper light. That's something that's been going on for a while. So thankfully, we're quite well set up as a business to do home working. But I'm really mindful, lots of clients, frontline businesses, whether that's hospitality or care, where, manufacturing, it's not, you can't just simply move your business to say, go and do it at home. It's just not possible. And I've spent a lot of this week talking about layoffs, redundancies, closures. So that side is pretty dark. But having said that, I've been really, really heartened by sort of the collaboration and spirit that people are showing. People with cafes and restaurants having to close, but, converting that to a delivery business, people actually conducting classes and learning, and even I think baby yoga online. Yeah. So some really creative solutions being found, and I think people are genuinely trying to support each other. So I think we will all need that support. So, hope that continues.
Thanks, Alison. And Steve, it's, the media calls this week very unprecedented, and that's a word that's going to be used quite a lot, but I think we should be using the word fragile, because it is. From your perspective, as a lawyer that I know, and as one that does really truly speak fluent human, tell us from your point of view what's going on.
It's weird. So I was going to try and get through this whole thing without mentioning GDPR because people just tune out. But on the verge of that, you had every client sort of preparing for what they thought the worst was going to be. And that's very much reflected what we've had over the last few days. Lots and lots of clients saying all of a sudden they've got big projects that are going on pause. That's a phrase that's been used an awful lot. Worried about the impact on the business, worried about the impact on themselves. And we've just had to say to people, the clock stops at this stage. We just need to get you through it. And I think, like Alison was saying before, we're just very keen to be trying putting out as much relevant, useful advice as we can, because nature abhors a vacuum, and in this particular case abhors a vacuum of actual useful practical tips to get through it. So it's weird. This weekend's going to be interesting, but I think hopefully, you mentioned it before, we'll settle down into a rhythm over the course of the next couple of weeks.
Sure. Thank you for that. So in terms of how this works, there's some questions coming already. So I'm going to start reading these out. I think for this particular webinar, I'll only use first names only. Some people are given second names, but I think it's probably the best thing I just use first names. So please do keep in the questions coming in. The first question we've had is from Angie. And she's asking, how do we stand if we can't pay our overheads, rent, phone, insurance? Can we legally cancel for a few months?
Well, so again, we go back to that phrase about contracts being on pause. The problem is you might find yourself in breach of an agreement pretty quickly if you don't meet a payment date. If you look at property, the 25th of March is the quarter rent date, and a lot of landlords are going to be expecting their money. Whether they do or they don't depends upon the stance they take. But I think, again, a phrase you used before, John, there's going to be an awful lot of reliance on goodwill. Do we want to be threatening people with claims and seeing businesses go out of business because then there's no relationship with them to recover over the course of the next few months? So if you can't pay, if it's something to do with the government, then you're in a bit of a different situation than it's something to do with a business. But talking to them and explaining where you are and making it clear to them that you are going to recover after this as much as you can do. You've got legal options, but there's more practical considerations at this stage, I think. Can
I just say, because obviously it is the week that is, isn't it? And it's not, this is not no week like any other. And obviously good communication is key here. But can you, from a legal point of view, how can you really advise, you're talking there about a landlord wanting to collect their rent. Absolutely, they've got a legal duty to do that. But surely as we go through this week and next week, there has to be some leeway. Am I right? Or can there be?
Well, I think the problem is that if you try and change the terms of contract unilaterally by yourself, that's going to be an unlawful variation. And it's really difficult to change the terms of any agreement unless you sign something that says that you can do. You may see a lot of people putting sort of short form agreements in place to allow that to happen. There'll be a big flurry of that. But without at least some kind of record of a discussion between you that sets that, change the terms or, grace period in writing, you might find yourself in a difficult position pretty quickly.
I'm going to turn it its head a little bit because the government has been announcing left, right and centre billions and billions and billions of pounds of support. And again, just to be devil's advocate here about, well, what does that mean actually? Because surely that does mean there's going to be help available. I'm not saying there is, but again, what's our thoughts around that?
I think just to go back to the rent point, we've certainly negotiated with clients a number of rent-free periods. So I think that's definitely something that can potentially be achieved. You'd like to think that landlords will work with their tenants. I think that's definitely been encouraged by the government, but I think landlords are just understanding that actually, particularly the high street, it was on its knees anyway, doesn't need a further kick. So actually working with tenants to allow them to hopefully get access to the funds. So as you say, the government have announced, a lot of money, but actually none of that money has yet reached any businesses, so far as I'm aware. I think the detail on how it's going to be distributed is due out beginning of next week, and businesses are absolutely desperate to get cash in. So I hope that process will be streamlined and result in cash very, very quickly.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is obviously legally, can you cancel for a few months? It's very, in black and white terms, probably not, but actually good communication and dialogue with those creditors, debitors, landlords.
I think it's a case of looking at all of your suppliers and identifying, which ones are likely to give you a bit of grace, which ones you just need to say, look, I can pay you 30%, 50%, whatever it is. But what you don't want is silence.
Sure.
I mean, this is the thing. One of the good things that might come out of this is a wider appreciation of disaster recovery. Yeah. And it's a horribly lawyer thing to say at this stage, but one of the key risks you look at is commercial. Yeah. You know, your suppliers, your supply chain, whoever else you've got a relationship with, plan for when this does happen, so you're at least able to move quickly. If we hope this kind of thing never happens again. But, you know, and it also factors into insurance. The more you do this kind of planning, the easier it is going to be to get at least the cover that's available.
And I absolutely. And I think one thing I want to say to people who are tuning in right now is obviously things are moving very fast. Money's being pumped into the economy. Bills are being put through Parliament. So what we say now is actually for today, and things may change very quickly next week. So obviously to keep an eye on to the Growth Company's website and the Business Growth Hub's website for that change in information. I've got a question here from, I don't know if it's a Mr. or Ms., but the surname is Meller. And very much they're saying, would loss of income due to project slowdowns or them being put on hold be classed as business interruption? I appreciate the financial impact would have to be demonstrated. So business interruption.
Sadly, I think the answer to that right now is probably no. The Association of British Insurers has been coming out the last couple of days saying that it's probably not going to be. Whether or not that remains the case after a few days more pressure and a few days more public outrage, I think we probably need to find out. But this is the problem. Certainly if you're looking to get yourself insured now, it's going to be expensive, if not impossible. And they will resist, I think, paying out for as long as they possibly can do.
And I'm just going to say this again from a fluent human point of view, that this is the week that was, or the week that is. It's going to be very difficult, I think, for insurance companies, for corporations to not take a view that this is different. I'm only saying that as, again, devil's advocate, to put you guys professionally on, to answer that, but it's what many people are thinking.
Yeah, I think the lessons learnt from now will be very beneficial for the future, but whether the insurers will actually bend right now, I think, business interruption, I think part of the problem is if you're a business owner, business interruption is what's happening now. Yeah. So they would clearly look to their policy and hope that it's going to cover them, because they are scrabbling around to try and find anything that's going to help them. Yeah. But I think the reality is when they dust it down, it will typically be linked to damage to the property. Yeah. So unless there's a link to damage to property, it's unlikely to cover. It could possibly, and after SARS, there were some extensions to policies introduced, but again, they're really, really specific to that policy, that business. Yeah,
it's piecemeal, isn't it? It's reactive to a situation rather than, we'll get to talk about force majeure eventually, but just to say we'll cover a pandemic is something you're going to imagine they're going to resist for as long as they possibly can.
Yeah. And I think the other positive thing, hopefully, that we can learn from what's happening now is making sure that we do understand what policies we've got and what they do cover, what contracts we've got, what obligations that gives to us and for the people that we deal with, because it's surprising how many of us do enter into contracts. We have good relationships with people and think, well, it will all be fine. Yeah. And hopefully it will all be fine. But actually, it's really helpful just to have a clear understanding so that you know what your obligations are, what you've got to play with, and when either you might be in breach or you might have something to pick up from your insurers.
Sure. As a business owner myself, what I've been heartened by is a lot of the messaging coming from insurers or banks saying, look, we recognise this is the week that is. Talk to us. So again, communication is key, isn't it? To do that.
Not the time to bury your head in the sand.
Absolutely not. I've got a question here from an employee. I'm not going to say where the employee works. It's a question from Salu, the name of the person, and he or she says, I was a full-time employee in this particular company. Due to COVID-19, the company was in lockdown. I was wondering whether I was eligible to receive any sort of financial aid, including my rent and bills. Now, I think it depends on the contracts, I suppose, but this is...
Yeah, depends very much on their relationship with their employer. Some contracts of employment will have, will give the employer the right to lay off, short-time working. Some businesses have had to very, very quickly go to closure. And then in some instances, they've had to lay staff off and or make them redundant. Employers, I think, are trying really hard to avoid that. So wherever possible, they'll look to agree a variation of the contracts with their employees. Yeah. So they may say, look, go home temporarily. We can't afford to pay you your normal salary because we've got no money coming in, but we will pay you X. Yeah. And we hope that once this passes, we will preserve your continuity of employment, which is an important thing for people. They might suggest take holidays rather than be unpaid. Yeah. And, hopefully they'll keep them on the books, even if they can't honour the payment side. But apart from that, I think individual employees and the self-employed will have to look at the moment, right here and now, to income support benefits like universal credit. Now, we are due an announcement back end of today, which we hope will bring some relief, I think, for employers and employees, so help with wages. There is a concern, though, that it might only be limited to certain sectors. So I think it's a case of watch this space.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was going to mention that because obviously the webinar that's taking place today, Friday 20th, everything's changing quickly. And as Alison said, there's an announcement due, which may be happening right now or certainly later on today, about the wage cover from government. So obviously do keep an eye on that. And I'm sure the growth company will be interpreting that and having some thoughts on that over the coming days. Just reminders that we are on the Growth Company webinar. We're talking about the legal implications for businesses and individuals. If you'd like to get involved, do tweet at GrowthCo UK or hashtag C19GC. Again, thank you to Steve and Alison for joining us here, and I'm hopefully my fluent human approach is paying off, because you are actually being great in terms of answering some of the questions. I've got one here that's going to be quite lengthy, but I just want to get into it because this is one that there's been obviously a lot of talk about the hospitality industry and the impact on the hospitality sector. And as we know, on Monday there's another webinar specifically for hospitality and tourism. Perhaps this is from the other side of what's being talked about right now. So I'll just read it out. I was contracted by a youth football tournament to provide accommodation in a certain northwest town for over approximately 20 hotels. Deposits have been paid to me and in turn the hotels in January. The second payment for Easter was due last Friday, and 50% deposits for May was due last Friday. The venues cancelled earlier this week, and the organisers cancelled with me yesterday using force majeure, which they believe warrants a relief of their obligations to pay and a right to their deposits back. So, questions. We'll go in order. Can force majeure, and I think if you can explain what that is, which isn't in my contract, be used yet as the hotels remain open and movement around the country hasn't yet been banned?
So I think most commercial contracts will have a force majeure clause in, and which is acts of God, basically. Okay. So it's war, civil disruption, commotion, riot, that kind of thing. However, most of them don't list pandemic as what they call a force majeure event. And the point of a force majeure clause, if you've got one, is that it allows either side to either suspend their obligations under a contract or get out the contract if that suspension lasts a certain amount of time, to walk away because it becomes impossible to carry on. If you haven't got a force majeure clause in the agreement, then you've got to try and manufacture one after the fact, if you like. And what we've seen in China is the government there almost certified COVID-19 as an outbreak as a force majeure event. So it's made it easier for businesses to stay in business. We've not seen that here, and down the other side of that are the insurance implications that it gives rise to. But at the minute, what's very clear from the cases is that force majeure does not come into play just because market conditions change and it gets more expensive to do business. And the worry here is that this is kind of being dressed up as force majeure when maybe it isn't. Right. So we haven't really seen much suggestion that COVID-19 is going to be force majeure just yet. I mean, Ali?
Yeah, no, I'd agree. We've had quite a lot of inquiries on this. So it's interesting in terms of looking at the clauses. I think those that will be successful, either to be enforced or to be said, well, actually, no, they don't work, are the ones that are carefully drafted. So I had one the other day where it just said force majeure, etc., etc. so that I think that they weren't going to go very far with that. We've also been advising on actually exhibitors. So they were going to a big conference internationally, actually, and the organisers cancelled it. But at the time, freedom of movement was okay. And we think we can challenge it successfully. And, they'd spent tens of thousands of pounds preparing for that conference, which they won't get back at the moment. So they are looking potentially to bring a claim.
I mean, it's a really hard one, isn't it? Because, of all the kind of like the shock and awe of this week, and the impact has been on hospitality. And there's a lot of concern there. And as I say, on Monday, the Growth Company webinar will be all about that. So on both sides of the coin. So the question also covers, force majeure, but are they in breach of contract? Are they liable for the payments they still owe? Can they demand it? Can the hotel demand the deposits back? Can they demand the deposits back? Sorry, even though they've been paid in good faith.
But I think the issue becomes more a practical one in that, yes, if you want to get into a dispute over it, you can have that dispute. Does anybody have the money at the minute to fight it out? If you're a massive business and it's life or death, then you'll need to. But the worry is the majority of SMEs at the minute just won't have that luxury. So again, having a decent dialogue with whoever you're about to fall out with, and at least playing on their goodwill as much as you can do, seems like a good option at the moment.
Can I go somewhere where you might want to go? But what about legal aid?
Well, what about legal aid?
Well, exactly. As a lay person, you hear legal aid, so you're looking for what can I actually do? It's
a very, very sad fact, and we're not going to go off piece, that legal aid has been absolutely decimated over the course of the last few years, criminal and civil.
Right.
You can occasionally get exceptional case funding to help you, but if you think it's going to be complicated getting a grant for a business and filling out those forms, getting exceptional case funding for legal aid is even tougher. You may, in some circumstances, I think they'll have some business insurance that will cover some legal fees.
Right.
So you'd be surprised how far that cover goes.
Yeah.
And more often than not, if you've got decent business insurance in place, there will be panels, and you'll be able to get access to at least some legal advice quite quickly.
Yeah, even a helpline advice you would, I mean, my thinking on that is it sounds as if, it's again, a question of dusting down the contract and seeing what actually was agreed. Are the deposits refundable? And again, as Steve said, it's all very well having a claim, but if nobody's got any money, the last thing you're going to do is spend your own time and money pursuing something. But certainly, in my experience from sort of tough times of the past, and unfortunately, people do have to start looking at legal claims because they've got nowhere else to go for the money.
Yeah.
So I think we can expect some more litigation. So I think businesses need to be prepared for that. But like Steve, I would say good communication. Everybody's in the same boat here. So, both sides, they can both have a bit of an argy-bargy with their terms and conditions and contract. But at the end of the day, this event presumably is something they want to hold again. They want to run it in the future. You'd be much better agreeing some sort of either a discount or some other positive that you can both take away from it and hopefully do business again.
But that's it, isn't it? I suppose if the thing that the positive that comes out of this is that people are starting to plan for what the world looks like after and what's going to come in the next quarter, then that may be the best way you can spend your time, firefighting the risks that you've got, but thinking about how things are going to look in 3 months' time.
Yeah.
And that's got to form part of your discussion with whoever you're at odds with.
Sure. I've got a question here from Anonymous, so thank you for that. So I think that's the safest way to go around. But this is about the announcement that's made probably at 1 o'clock this morning, 1:30, about key workers. If an employee cannot come into work because he or she is not classified as a key worker and has no one to look after the dependent child, are there any guidelines for the employer? It's a job where you cannot work from home. Will the employer be able to reclaim costs from the government for paying the worker whilst not in work and or cover them? If the person is unable to come to work, where does the employer stand and what are the options? So I think what we're trying to say here is, if you can't work from home, what are the options?
And they've got childcare responsibilities, is that right?
If an employer cannot come in because he or she is not classed as a key worker and has no one to look after the dependent child, are there any guidelines for the employer?
Well, strictly, the employee is expected to come to work.
Yeah.
So, that's obviously not going to work in these circumstances.
Yeah.
There are a few limited statutory rights. So you do have the right to time off for emergencies, but that is typically 1 or 2 days while you make other plans. Now, for lots of families, grandparents and friends would normally step in, but everybody's going to be in the same boat. Yeah. Grandparents are out of bounds because they've got to isolate. Yeah. So it is going to fall on the parents. So I think they will be looking to their employer to effectively work with them through this period. The other type of leave they could look at is parental leave, but that is where you've actually got 4 weeks per year per child. But, the way the mood music is, this is going to go on for longer than 4 weeks. Yeah. And the issue with both of those types of leave is that they're unpaid, strictly under a statutory point of view. So it's a question of employer and employee having a dialogue and seeing what support might be available, and really having an eye to the announcement this afternoon to hope that something more will be done by the government to help employers be able to pay in these circumstances. And I think if that doesn't work, then you're looking at social security benefits like universal credit, so you have some income coming in. So I think all of those things need to be explored as soon as possible.
I would say from an employer's point of view, obviously, and where you can be flexible. And I think I appreciate not all businesses can be flexible, but when there is flexibility that you can allow, because, again, in the week that is, we're now, majority of people who have children are now be working with children at home. And I think where employers can actually just adopt to that and adapt to that, and working practices and working patterns, trust your employees to actually adapt to that and carry on. That's my simplistic way of saying it. But I think, again, this is so unprecedented, using that word, that next week this could all change. It could be guidance for employers, and best practice. And let's hope that happens, because there needs to be a great deal of empathy.
Yeah,
right now.
I think there is. That's been my experience. But the more complicated, the more complicated issue is the businesses where you can't work from home. Absolutely. So it's fine if you say, right, fine, you set up at home, you've got your own computer, you can access all the files that you need, and I trust you to do your job. Fine. Yeah. But if you're a factory worker and you need so many people on the line, or the line doesn't run, what do you do?
Yeah. Hope this has been useful so far. I would reiterate, if you've got any more questions or any further questions, do please send them in. And do follow us on social media at Growth UK for Twitter. Hashtag is C19GC. I can't repeat it enough. You've got two fluent human lawyers here who can answer as best they can in the week that is. Just moving on, I've got somebody called Anthony. Anthony runs a very busy opticians, and it says we're a mix of retail and health. It's a very unusual blend compared to other businesses. We've not been told to close, and on the contrary, have been advised to stay open to reduce burden on eye hospitals if needed. However, most routine checkup and sales will be, to use your words, on pause for now, our words, of course. This means revenue will be way down for some time to come. I've got between 8 and 10 staff in any day, and with a quieter shop, there's no need for that many. What are my rights with regards to offering reduced hours and therefore reduced pay, in the hope it's a short-term agreement? I think a lot of businesses and employees are thinking about this right now, so let's have a good discussion.
So I think this is quite a typical scenario, unfortunately. The starting point, again, I seem to be saying this a lot, is the contract. So there isn't any general right to lay employees off. There has been some talk of that from the government, but they haven't put anything in right here and now. So if you've got the right to lay off, then that does allow all short-time working. You can speak to your staff, give them notice that's your intention, and introduce it. But it's quite a harsh reality, because if you lay somebody off, their strict entitlement is to £29 a day, and only for a very limited number of days. I think it's 5 days in a 3-month period. So nobody's really going to be able to live off that. So I think if you can avoid that and do something that's really more informal, and you're back to the type of arrangement Steve was discussing earlier, where you consensually agree. So you agree between you as the employer and the employee, this is what we can afford. I need to share the hours between the 7 or 8 staff that I've got. I don't want to prefer perhaps one over another. So if there's somebody that's got a key role and they have to be in, fine, keep them in to their hours. But people that actually are more doing the same type of role, and you can share hours and share pay, then you'd hope that you can reach agreement on that.
It's a high-minded ideal, isn't it? But we've seen a lot of our clients have got maybe very senior people coming into the business, and then all of a sudden they're about to join and this happens. So if you can at least have a sensible discussion with them, is to say, well, bear some of the pain with us, as opposed to you joining and us having to dismiss you immediately, and you only being entitled to maybe a notice period, for example, and we'll look after you after that. This may be where culture does a lot of the heavy lifting for businesses. If they can really see what they're buying into and understanding that, we need to make short-term sacrifice so there's still an employer there on the other side of it, I think you'll see an awful lot of those conversations happening right now, whether or not it's senior or sort of more junior members of the team.
What I'm loving about this is the fact that I'm really putting you two on the spot, and you are legals and you have to stick to the points, and you're doing that brilliantly, really well. We're also always looking for them crumbs of flexibility. And I think you're doing that really well as well. I think, again, this is the week that is, isn't it? So it's about, what actually is the legal terms of the contracts, or what is actual law, versus the world we're kind of now in terms of what. So that exactly point about the flexibility of people coming to people will be actually have handed in notice for a job to come to your business, where their rights, and that flexibility, I think, is a thing.
But that's the thing, though, isn't it? Employment law is very process driven, and that process is going to need to evolve with the times, especially at the moment. And you might be thinking about, well, as an employer, I've got to think about how I manage sickness absence. What about this sickness? This is a completely different set of considerations. And you may say, well, if someone's off for so long, that becomes a disciplinary. But do you really want to be pursuing a disciplinary in this environment? Which way is that likely to go? Yes, again, you have legal options, but you've also got the human factor to this, and that's coming to the fore in these circumstances like it probably never has done before now.
I think that's right. So also just go back to the layoff point. One of the things an employer would typically do is say, look, I'm laying you off, but I completely understand you need an income, and I will support you in going to find a second job.
Yeah.
But that's not going to happen in this scenario, because there are not going to be very many second jobs. So the reality is employees do have the right, if they're laid off for a period of time, to elect to say, look, I'm going to treat myself as redundant now. But again, where's that going to get them? The employer's going to struggle to find redundancy money anyway, and they're made redundant. They might get a bit of money, but then they've not got a job. So you would hope that when people stand back and look at, the reality of the situation, that they'll think, actually, if we support each other and try and work this out together, it's going to be tough for everybody. Everybody's going to bear some pain. There's a nice expression, it's not mine, but it always sticks in my head. Everybody needs to take a balloon home from the party.
I like that.
So we need a few balloons to share.
Everyone does indeed. And again, this is at the backdrop of any announcement that hasn't been made yet. This is Friday the 20th, around about 1:00. And there's an announcement due today by government about employee cover. So this may change the conversation. This is fast moving. This is week 1. I'm sure everyone appreciates it. Probably feels like year 5 in the virus days, because it's every day is different. So just to give that caveat, and again, thank you for your honest answers here. I have another question which is related from Achusti. Is it possible for employees on temporary layoff to claim benefits? I think that may have been covered, but.
Yeah, I think they're not going to get very much from their employer. As I said, it's £29 a day, going up to £30 a day in April, but only over a 3-month period. So, they will have to apply for universal credit, I understand. So, yes, it is possible, but that, although the government is saying they're doing everything they can to speed that process up, I would say, make your application really early.
Okay.
And I do have a concern around that, because I'm involved with a literacy trust, and one of the things they say is online applications is just a nightmare. I think there is a promise that they're going to make the application process easier. They're going to allow that to be done by telephone and make adjustments. So I think it's really important that that's addressed, I think.
Brilliant. And in the week that was, I think everything's been mobilised to try and make this happen quicker at a pace that we all want to be quick, but we've got to recognise that doing this is going to be, it's going to take some time, I think. I've got a great question here, and it's from Kerry. Thank you, Kerry, for this. I would like to ask what support there's going to be for landlords who rent to businesses, e.g. office space, or any resulting rates relief in the event of empty offices. The landlord still has to pay rates. And, that is a really valid question. Landlords are human too. Landlords have got liabilities too, and we're all saying landlords give us a break, but actually what happens to landlords?
It's a great question. I mean, again, we've seen some announcements around rates relief so far. We've seen an awful lot of discussion around how flexible, there's that word again, that relationship's going to be. The fact is we don't know. There are, and that's, we don't want to use that phrase, but it's a matter of fact. We're going to have to see what's announced over the course of the next few days. It's a very febrile, reactive environment, and that's a very specific question that they're going to need to get to. But there is no shortage of lobbying from the property industry to deal with this kind of thing. You'd hope over the course of the next few days, a lot of these issues are going to come into clearer focus.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the business rate relief at the moment is only for the very smallest businesses. Yeah. So there's and also only in certain sectors. So there's a big push to say, it should be across the board. But there's always I guess, an unintended consequence, because my understanding is that business rates now go to the local authorities. So if the local authority doesn't get the business rates, what then happens to local authority services? Sure. So I think we absolutely should be discussing it, and landlords should not be the only ones to bear the pain here. But I think we just need to look at it very much in the round.
And very related to this, thank you, Denise, for your question. What measures have been put into place for businesses which work from home? The grants all appear to be based around rateable values of a business. Any advice on that?
Short answer, no, not yet. Again, I think that's one of we're seeing employment law having to cope with the stress of working from home. We're seeing contract and data protection and everything else. Yeah. And again, we're going to have to, as tech and as disruption shows, kit bash a lot of old systems to make sense of this new environment over time. So I think we're going to hopefully should see something about that, given that the majority of the UK is going to be working from home over the next few days.
Yeah, I think this whole scenario has highlighted, the gig economy and, with an awful lot of self-employed people either working from home or working in, communal work areas, that sort of thing, how vulnerable it actually is, how little protection there is for them. So I think that will be addressed.
Okay. Just to remind you, are tuned into The Growth Company, the brilliant organisation that's on the side of businesses right now, and thank God for them. We are with two very good lawyers, speaking fluent human, Alison and Steve. We're coming towards the last 10 minutes. I've got a couple of questions I want to talk about the future. These are going to be quite difficult for you to answer, but I want us all to have a little answer towards the end. But I've got a question here from Alex. And Alex says, clients may stop paying bills even if work is delivered and not pause because they believe that we'll be able to access business support funds. Will the government guidance set clear parameters? Great question, Alex.
Again, so this may well, and it's a really glib phrase, become the golden age of account management. Yeah. We've talked before about a sensible discussion, but as far as that side of things goes, you're going to need to explain to whichever clients you're dealing with, you need us to be around in 2 or 3 months' time. If you're happy with the deliverables and the work we're doing, then we're going to need to be able to keep on doing so. But again, this idea of the pause, there's very little legal tolerance of the idea of a pause. So a lot of it's going to come down to, again, do you save this up and agree that, we'll give you some leeway and then we'll invoice for this in due course? Do you give them a little bit of time? Certainly if you work in the marketing space, if they're investing in a project, it's going to take 6 or 9 months maybe for that to come to fruition. So then to pause at this stage and potentially do a lot of that work, that's where these discussions will come in really, really, really handy. Yeah,
it's an interesting question, really. I think my experience of that recently has been the manufacturing client and the business aid supply turned around, many months after the goods had been delivered and said, there was a problem defect in manufacture. And my client's like, no, there isn't. Let me come and inspect. Went to inspect. Is in the process of having the goods examined by an expert, but we're pretty confident that that's, there's no issue. And the other side are basically saying, look, come on, you can claim on your insurance. And my client says, well, actually, no, the insurance wouldn't cover this. So I think sometimes there is this misnomer, think, well, you'll be able to get some money from somewhere, or you're better fixed to weather this out than we are. And that's often not the case. So I think we've got to go back to, if you started off thinking it was a good idea to do business together, then you need to support each other and, make it happen.
I'm taking, again, flexibility, communication, dialogue. Yeah. You're both lawyers. This has been a week, that is. Where do you get your guidance? Government are making an announcement every single day. How do you keep up with this? What's your, is it Law Society? How do you... obviously law is statutes, but how do you, what are you doing to kind of absorb and advise and interpret right now?
I mean, look, the Law Society is doing its best, and I sit on the Law Society Council, so I've been fairly close to this, to explain to the profession what they need to do to deal with stuff like courts remaining open, criminal legal aid, all that kind of stuff. You know, the gears of justice as they normally look at it. At the minute, I think the best thing we can do is listen to our clients, listen to the commercial issues out there, see what they're facing, and just watch at 5 p.m. every day like everybody else is. Every good lawyer is going to have a decent set of current awareness alerters, so you're going to see what everybody else is saying about the outbreak and come to your own opinion. But ultimately, we've got to listen to the clients.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. You know, the law is there, and it's, you know, anybody can now look at the law. You could look at the law even though you're not a lawyer. It's really about using your experience and I think your sort of commercial nous to think, well, actually, you know, I've got lots of clients that have convinced themselves they've got the best claim in the world, but, you know, should you really be spending time negatively looking at that as opposed to thinking what you will do with your business in the future? So I think it's a balance, but yeah, be client led and be very commercial in your outlook.
Yeah, you mentioned
rather than legal.
Absolutely. You mentioned 5 o'clock briefings there, and we're all, I'm sure many of us are tuning in to kind of hang on to the words of what the government's saying and trying to work out fast what's that work for us, you know. And I think every business owner, you know, it's about survival, it's about getting through this, it's about actually getting through to the other end. And I think, you know, talking to other businesses, absolutely the right decisions are being made this week because we need to protect ourselves and our families, and there's no doubt about that. But pretty soon we're going to be wanting these kind of, well, when can we start getting back? When is this pause button going to be unpressed, and what does it look like? And I'm not going to put you on the spot here. We've got a couple of minutes just to kind of like try and just imagine or envisage what, you know, when and how will that happen? If you've got any thoughts on that, clearly not to be held legally, or you know, anything you say here is not, you know, it's your own thoughts on that.
Well, if you're looking at Twitter, you know, the government scientists are suggesting that self-isolation is going to have to go on for 12 months or until the end of the year. And the Prime Minister says much shorter than that. As ever, there's probably going to be a bit of a fudge in between the two. I just would have thought that the economy is not going to withstand that much of a shock for that long, and the government is going to work very, very hard to try and not only protect people, but protect businesses on the other side of that. Lockdowns are being proven to work, but they will only work for a certain amount of time. So I think, you know, the political administration on both sides of the Atlantic is going to need for the economy to start rebounding as soon as it can.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. This crisis effectively is having a very, very personal impact on people as well. It's not just a business impact.
Absolutely.
It's not just some financial markets. It's actually everybody in their everyday life and their families and their parents, children. So I think it is making people take a long, hard look at society. And I think things will definitely change. You know, whether it's 3 months or 12 months, people will think, actually, what were we doing? You know, have we learned some lessons in the meantime, and is there a better way for us to go about our day to day? And
certainly, you know, we've seen people already take things for granted less. You know, the ability to see your parents and your friends and just nip around for a cup of coffee, that's changed very, very quickly. And if this leaves us a bit more grateful once it's all settled down as far as it can be, then I'm not sure that's the worst thing.
Sure. And in time of crisis, we always look for authentic voices. This podcast series is being hosted and delivered by The Growth Company. The Growth Company is there on the side of business and is here to support everybody. So do keep tuning in. On Monday, there is a special podcast about the hospitality and retail sectors. So please do get your questions in for that. Continue to follow The Growth Company on Twitter at GrowthCoUK. Hashtag is C19GC. Towards the end, we're coming towards the end. Have you got any final 30-second roundups you'd like to give just before we go out?
I think my point is really be looking to the future, that everybody's got their tin hat on right now. They haven't really got much choice over that, but you need to have a business and, you know, you need to survive to make sure that you can take the business forward in the future. So start looking ahead. Don't just be focusing on the here and now.
Sure. Steve?
It's an overused phrase, but disruption. You know, learning to embrace that and learning to embrace whatever normal looks like, again, not just now, but 3 months, 6 months, 9 months from now. Thinking about how you will recover from something like this is probably about the best use of your time once you're past the immediate firefighting. I couldn't agree with Ali more. the businesses are going to come out of this, and people are going to come out of this hopefully a little bit leaner, a little bit more circumspect. And it certainly will change the way we look at things, but I'm not sure it's all going to be bad.
Steve, Alison, real heartfelt thanks for your time today, your guidance, going through navigating this week that is. I hope you found today's discussion informative, and that as businesses you feel slightly better prepared to deal with any potential legal implications of COVID-19 on your organisation. Really important, so get a pen please. If you have any further questions, email info@growthco.uk. That's info@growthco.uk, and we'll get back to you. We'll have another webinar coming up on Monday, as I said, and that's going to focus on the hospitality, leisure and tourism businesses who are proving to be some of the hardest hit. Thank you for listening.